I do coach that skill in isolation with a couple of tackle bags, a big tackle bag, the big sausage where you knock it over, and the coach has a ball at the end of it, so the boys have to get up off the ground and get to the ball, and then it's right under their nose, and they've just got to step past it, and you get the second arriving player to bind on. So it can happen. It can happen in a couple of ways, and coaches need to understand it's not a perfect picture all the time.
Tom, thanks so much for joining us today. We've already had a great yarn, and I guess the topic we're going to talk about is counter-ruck, some of the principles that you've seen and started working on, and a bit of a mentality that you've been coaching. So awesome to see you've got some footage on screen, and yeah, keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my pleasure. So what we spent a bit of time on last year, and obviously taking into this season, was some dominant pitches that we often are presented with in the game of footy, and what sort of technique we can use to get the ball back, because obviously we're in position, and the game's all about regaining position when we give it away. And so this is a good example of a counter ruck on the edge, where we've moved some phase play from left to right, and we've ended up on the edge with a number of chasers. Obviously, that brings the Highlanders forwards and backs up into a straight line, and with a 10 at the back. So if I click on and watch this play, the kick goes up, and we have a good chase line and an isolated ball carrier here. So we can see there's 3 arriving white players at the breakdown, or about to be the breakdown at the tackle, and I'm watching the actions of the arriving players. So the first person to note is Rico's the tackler. He falls into the tackle space that referees don't like, but he immediately rolls out. But the actions of the 2 players in behind him are key. So that's Matt Duffy and TJ Farney in the 12 jersey. So rather than using the option to try and bend down and jackal this, when you're at pace, it's quite a tough thing to do. Both of them choose another option, which is to step past the ball and isolate the tackle player. So what they've done is they've effectively created an offside line at the head of the ruck, which now the blue have to conform to, and makes the ruck nice and long for us arriving at the ball. In this case, Mark Talia bends down, picks the ball up, and it's play on. So we could debate at length the entry of the blue players. But the good thing about this tactic is we've still got the position back, and we've got an unstructured defensive line to play into.
You mentioned there, Tom, just about the players at speed, and I thought that made so much sense. So that's something that you'd be talking to players about the decision-making of the scenario that they're in, and are they at speed or are they not, with trying to bend over?
Yeah, I think the key is we try and cue the movement. So if I just go back a little bit, we know that we're in a good position when we can look across the field and we can see ourselves in a line. And if we know what our action is going to be, we use a cue word here about taking the space. So we would already discuss what the action is going to be, and the key actions of the 2 players in behind the tackler. We try and make this a 2-man job, but because Rico has rolled out, effectively he'll be back on his feet before the counter ruck takes place. So the boys have done a really good job, in my mind, of understanding their roles, understanding the law, and slowing their feet down. So as you've said, rightly, they've chased hard, but they've put the brakes on, they've loaded themselves, so they're in a good position to be able to do what comes next, which is to take the space past the ball. For this to be legal and to be able to take the space, they cannot fall off their feet into the ruck where Rico has exited. They must stay on their feet. And they need to be bound to create length. If they're not bound, then obviously the only person that's sitting the offside line is the front. So if we want to make this long, 12 binds onto the front, which is Matt Duffy, and that then creates the offside line. So you could argue whether 13 from blue has gone back enough to try and challenge for position there.
Yeah, love it. Awesome example.
All right, so that's a good example. That happens a lot in footy, where often players will try and jackal there. I just think this is one for the toolbox. You put this in your bag of tools, and you can choose to jackal there. Maybe if you get good at this, this would become your preference. So if I move on to some more pictures to have a look at. Okay, so this is an example of the ball carrier isolated from his support. So he goes to ground really quickly. The guy's on his outside shoulder expecting a pass. But when he's brought to ground so quickly, he gets isolated from them. So now the offside line becomes the head of the ruck created by the two white players who decide not to try and pick the ball up, but in effect to take space past the ball. Yeah. So neither of the, what I would call, they're both unselfish acts from both those two boys. The key is the tackler up quickly and Caleb Clark joining on and stepping to the front. And they've done effectively what happened in the last picture. They've created links to the ruck. Now the entry of 14 and 8 blue is then compromised. They need to challenge through the gate or through the head of the ruck. And so what I would try and coach here a little bit better than what our boys have done is just try and keep their back foot over the ball, because as soon as they go too far past the ball, they open up the space.
You're so right. You're so right about it being a unselfish act from those two first players, right? And I suppose a bit of work ethic coaching from just trusting that next person, the guy in the headgear here, will be there.
Yes, and this is probably a better example of two guys doing this. What can happen if you're a little bit anxious is you can send too many in there, Peter, to try and secure position, and we end up with, and if it doesn't come to fruition, we end up with committing too many. So the third player's role is to hopefully play the ball if the two guys at the front have done their job.
Awesome.
So some fine detail. Try and get the boys to stop with their foot over the ball, their back foot, and that's about as long as you need to get. And then it takes away the vagrancy for the referee.
Any detail just on this guy picking the ball up with the headgear on, like what he's trying to do? Is it as simple as just get the ball?
I think so. I mean, in this case, if he didn't try and pick the ball up, he would have been challenged for it from 14 blue. So he's done the right thing. And once again, it's play on from the referee. I would have liked an advantage, but Epper's picked the ball up. He's about to move the ball and play. What happens is we end up with a little ruck just to the right of it. I would have preferred that he was tried to make that available to play.
Yeah, cool.
But this is all about getting the ball back. So there was a chop tackle, a nice double-shouldered counter ruck from Caleb in the 12. We've got possession back, which is key. That's what the game's about. And if we move on to one more example. So the other example where we're moving forward onto things is when we isolate a ball carrier and all the support is compromised. So once again, if we look at this example, actually I'll get rid of the sound. The ball pops out. Brad's actually not expecting the ball to pop out, and it rolls him behind him. So he needs to try and play that quite quickly, and he gets tackled a long way from his support. So the closest support is one black and Anton Leonard Brown, who's standing beside the referee. So they're the only two that can really help Brad. So I'm watching the actions of 12 blue, which is TJ Farney, who's really good at this. His understanding of cues is really strong. If you watch what he does, he goes straight to the front. And by going to the front and past the ball, he creates an offside line. And now Brendan sees the entry of 12 from the right-hand side going in front of TJ. And that's where the penalty occurs, because Anton's entered from an offside position because of the actions of 12. So rather than, once again, try and bend over and pick that ball up off Brad, we've chosen to take the space past the ball to counter-ruck that and look for infringements from the team that's been compromised, in this case, black. And so all those pitches are clear pitches if you continue to coach that decision-making process around when we're dominant. Dominant, isolating a ball carrier. Dominant when you're chop tackling someone in general play, isolating them from their support, and also getting a bend or an isolated ball carrier in general play. This could happen with just a ball carrier being driven backwards past the support players and then being compromised. So they're all examples, I think, of where the Jackal is probably not the best option, but taking the space and counter-rucking works better.
So that last part you mentioned about guys sort of, I've noticed it as well, almost falling in love with the Jackal, like they just see it and want to get on the Jackal. And I suppose my question is, how are you now drilling this mindset and creating opportunities in training for players to, see the different pitches and then understand what decision they should make?
I think what we try to do, Peter, is we make training to involve as much decision-making process, to train the decision-making process best we can. So we try and set up scenarios just like you've observed, obviously with the heat taken out of the tackle. But the actions of arriving at the breakdown being really technical and looking for the cues and looking for the language that they use between each other, and then what the actions would look like to get a perfect scenario. So it's about also letting them experiment with both the Jackal and the counter-ruck and seeing which one works best in which scenario, in which case. And so it's training the pitches, trying to find some context in training, and then give the boys plenty of opportunity to practice it.
And the things that put pressure on this not working. So I suppose some of those pitches were players at speed, wide channels. When is this not a priority to use?
It doesn't work when the first arriving player decides that he's going to bend over and try and pick the ball up.
Yeah.
So the first cue needs to be to take.
Why doesn't it work?
Why it doesn't work? Because the second arriving player often knocks you over and pushes you into the ruck, where you collapse into the space that the referees are really vigilant at. So you fall into the ruck where the halfback's trying to play the ball. You've got to be out of there almost immediately. So there's almost no room for error in today's game. So it's safer in my mind to have your head up and your body in a strong position to be able to step over the ball. It creates length. The other thing about jackling is when you bend down to pick up the ball, you enter a contest with the opposition, have a shorter route to get to you. The ball's in front of them like it is for you. And it also allows the tackle player to be able to place the ball, which they're allowed to do. It's difficult to do that when someone's just stepped over you because it's a long way from the ball back to your support players. So the things that can go wrong, being too fast at the breakdown and not slowing your feet down, and the second arriving player knocking you off your feet and into the ruck. So those are the things. So if you think about the term go, load, go, or some coaches use the term zoom, cruise, zoom, there needs to be a part of that where you're getting to the breakdown quickly as you can, and then you need to slow your feet and you need to think about your entry and how you're going to access the ball accurately without falling off your feet.
Yeah.
And that's the load part. And then you can start to accelerate again once through the content, once you've joined on and you've got that nice shape that you've created.
Great cues. It's so similar to general play kicking. If you're at speed, there has to be a part of the kick that's at balance. So go, balance, and then execute. And it's basically exactly what you're saying. Just to wrap up, I mean, that's been magic. Great examples. Was there anything else just around that you wanted to get in before we wrapped?
Not really. I do coach that skill in isolation with a couple of tackle bags, a big tackle bag, the big sausage where you knock it over, and the coach has a ball at the end of it, so the boys have to get up off the ground and get to the ball, and then it's right under their nose, and they've just got to step past it, and you get the second arriving player to bind on. So it can happen. It can happen in a couple of ways, and coaches need to understand it's not a perfect picture all the time. Sometimes the tackler can be up and first. Sometimes the first arriving player will be first. It doesn't really matter what order you get it in, as long as you're coaching the actions of taking the space past the ball, whether it's tackler up first or the first arriving player up the front first. Those two cues are the key to making it work. And as you've mentioned, in footy, it's not always about leg speed. You know, we often don't teach boys or men to take space past something slowly, because everything's about doing things fast, and sometimes speed kills us. And in this instance, you need to go slow to execute that particular skill on counter-ruck.
Magic, Tom. I knew that you were the right man to get on for the first crack at one of these, and you've delivered. So absolutely magic, and I'm sure we'll see you again on here.
No worries. Pleasure.
Thanks, mate.
Okay.